For months now, we have been hearing about the war between Ukraine and Russia on a daily basis. And each time, if we pay attention, we can hear how NATO is involved, despite the fact that neither Ukraine or Russia is a member. But what does NATO have to do with all this? First of all, it is necessary to say what NATO is. NATO is an international organization whose purpose is the cooperation and defense of its member states, which means that it is an alliance in which the member countries undertake to work together to resolve international crises brought through diplomacy and military missions. But how did NATO come into being and why? As we know, after the Second World War, the world was divided into two blocks between two great winners of the conflict, the United States and the Soviet Union. And after the peace agreement, at the end of the conflict, those two superpowers began to challenge each other for global supremacy, leading to the Cold War. On 4th April 1949, the major Western nations signed the North Atlantic Treaty in Washington, a politically and military alliance that created a united front against possible aggressions from the Eastern Bloc. The Soviet Union's response was to conclude a similar agreement in 1955 between the Soviet-influenced countries, the Warsaw Pact. So, what is its function? Nowadays, NATO has 29 members and is responsible for maintaining the security and stability of its member nations. According to the Article 5 of the treaty, if a member state is attacked, the allies must act. So far, this has only happened once, on 11 September 2001. In addition to this, the organization also undertakes peacekeeping missions, such as in Bosnia or in Kosovo, at the end of the last century. But back to the war between Russia and Ukraine. The roots of this war date back to 2014, when, after the flight of Ukrainian President Yanukovych, Russia occupied Crimea and Donbas. After these events, nothing more happened until the end of March 2021, when the Russian army started to move large amounts of weapons and equipment into Crimea and a fleet from the Caspian Sea and the Black Sea. In November, the director of CIA communicated the American concern about the situation at the border, but the response of the Russian defense minister was that the concentration of US warships in the Black Sea was a threat to Russian security and strategic stability. On 30 November 2021, Putin declared that an expansion of NATO's presence in Ukraine would be a major problem for Russia, and therefore demanded that Ukraine could never join the organization. However, on 26 January 2022, the Americans rejected Moscow's request. On 15 February, Putin authorized the withdrawal of troops from the Russian-Ukrainian border, saying he had no intention of starting a war. But only 2 days later, it turned out that Russia had not only not withdrawn troops, but had also increased the military on the border. And on 24th February, after a speech by Putin, the invasion began. But why does Russia want Ukraine so badly? It has to be said that Russia has always considered Ukraine as a natural wall of its sphere of influence, and many Ukrainians are actually Russian speakers. Putin has repeatedly stressed that Ukraine is an integral part of Russia's history and culture. In fact, according to the president, Ukraine is not only a neighboring country, but Ukrainians are related to Russians. However, as we can understand, these facts could never be enough to invade a country. In fact, we have to remember that Ukraine is a very rich country. For example, it is the country in Europe with the most uranium and titanium reserves. It is the fourth country in the world for total value of natural resources. It is also the first country in Europe in terms of area under cultivation and has the fourth largest gas pipeline system in the world. These are just a few examples. And the strategic position of Ukraine should also not be forgotten because it has always had the function of a buffer state. Could this conflict have been avoided? Certainly, but it must be remembered that it could have been avoided thanks to both Russia and NATO. In fact, on 6 March 1991, a meeting was held in Bonn, where the United States, France, Great Britain, and Germany declared that they would undertake not to expand NATO's presence beyond the Elbe River. And as we can immediately see, this promise was not kept. This is certainly not to say that Russia is right, but I would like to point out that, in my opinion, this conflict could have been avoided by both sides. And I actually believe that the massacre that Putin is bringing to Ukraine is in no way justifiable. But if at some point in the future Ukraine had actually joined NATO, the consequences could have been far worse, as the rivalry between the US and Russia has never actually ended. And Russia would never have accepted having such a powerful enemy on its doorstep.